This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Sporting Director FC Djusholm.Karl Sandberg. He discusses the development pathway in Swedish football, compares the Swedish and UK football ownership models, as well as discussing the intricacies of the academy system and the financial impact this has on football within the country. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Right, Carl, you are my first podcast having come back from skiing and not injured myself, so which is always good news. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me and joining us. How are things your end? Are you all good?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me in your podcast. Well, we are in mid-winter, what is for us the pre-season. In Sweden, the season is a bit backwards compared to the rest of Europe. We start competing in April, so somewhere around November, we are forming the teams for the next season, especially youth teams, but also professional teams. They start a bit later. They have a break at the end of the competition. So right now we are in that process of forming teams, of having this preseason, dealing with winter and all the snow that lays on the football fields. So that is my day-to-day right now.
Well, maybe if you've had some good snow, I might be able to come across and do a skiing holiday over there at some point.
Yes, you get a lot of skiing here.
For people that maybe don't know you, haven't come across your work, do you just want to give us a bit of an overview, I guess, of who you are, and what you do from a day-to-day basis?
Yes. Well, my background, say from when I myself was a young person, I'm actually an engineer, but in time I got interested in football. And when my son was 4 years old, we enrolled a grassroots club from the neighborhood, and they asked if I could volunteer as a football coach. This is quite normal here in Sweden, that parents coach their sons. There are professional clubs with employed professional coaches, but the most common way to start playing football in Stockholm in Sweden is having parents coaching the teams. So I did this, and I played a bit of football, not professionally when I was young, but I've always had this interest, and a little bit like in other careers, like in engineering, I got this professional interest for understanding how you coach youth players the best way. So in a few years, I started to investigate on my own and attended a few courses. And I was recruited by a company that's called Curver that works with technical training. This happened in a tournament. I remember when they were scouting me, and they thought maybe that I couldn't see that they were scouting, but you perceive when someone is standing close to you and looking at you, and I thought this was quite strange. But this happened, and then I worked with them for some time, and I switched careers. I just found out that maybe I had a skill that was interesting for these people that worked in football full time. And I started working part time with this, combining with other jobs to be able to work with football. And this became larger and larger. I had my own company, and eventually in time I was working with different grassroots clubs as a coach, having many different teams. And for about 6 years ago, I was contacted by a person that I got to know in a course that a Spanish company had here, and I was working as a translator for this course. And he asked me, he was working as the club director of the club that I am working at right now, and he asked me if I wanted to come and work as an academy coordinator. And since then to now, I have been working as a sporting director. This happened 1 year after I got the job as an academy director, and that's somehow a brief description of how I got where I am right now.
No, I think it provides a real nice overview of probably a non-traditional way of getting into coaching as well.
Yes.
Because, you know, a lot of people, similar to myself, failed playing career and end up going, well, what do I want to do? If I can't play, I'll teach, and kind of muck around that way. In UK, at least, the academic side has become more prevalent, with people going and doing football courses and then staying on. But I think that's quite a nice blend in terms of you having a different background and being able to imagine use some useful skills that you learned in engineering and bring them across. I know Mark Warburton, who's the former Rangers manager, did that over here. He was a former banker and then ended up being a first team manager, which
Okay.
is always interesting. I guess for you, stepping into the coaching world, what things do you think engineering or being from a different background translated across really well, and what bits maybe shocked you in terms of going, I didn't even understand that you had to do this as a coach, or
Yes.
yeah, what did that look like?
Well, I think you mentioned the academic part of football right now, and I think that's good for football. In my opinion, what an academic background gives you is the capacity to analyze things and to look at football in a more structured way. I would say the positive part of structured, because there is also a negative part of structuring things too much. In my opinion, football is becoming more professional, but also more academic in the positive way. Still, I think it's a sport where the talent and the freedom of playing football is very important. But I think engineering, just for taking that as an example, gives you the capacity to maybe build a model for development that has a better structure and maybe a more well thought how to when working with youth players, if that makes sense. But of course, with a football content.
No, that makes complete sense. And as you said, I think that, you know, academies in particular in the UK have an EPPP, which is almost a game model or a progression model through the pathway. And, you know, engineering, that's been going on for decades in terms of having models that you put materials through or processes that you go through in order to build certain apparatus or build certain ideas. So I think that, yeah, as you mentioned, that's a really nice starting point. Is actually what type of things can we put in place as a process that supports the player development, which is obviously more of a subjective, coach-led type endeavor, more of an art than maybe a specific process. But can we have the process below that? When we look at Sweden in general, what does your football landscape look like? Because I'm conscious that, you know, across the world, all the systems look very different. In the UK, we start particularly early. We have, you know, pre-academy setups that are 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, and then we go into academy football at under 9s, and everyone's signed and registered to particular clubs. What does it look like in Sweden, and what would you say there are any particular positives or negatives in that space?
Yes, well, I think there is a historic approach of football being a sport that should be accessed by everyone without having this separation between grassroots football and academy football. But also, Swedish clubs have lately, in my opinion, latest maybe 20 years, accompanying the commercialization of football in general in the world, have acquired an economy that gives them the possibility to maybe get a bit closer to professional football in Europe. So I think right now there is a division of what was the historical way of portraying football in Sweden and how it's becoming right now. There is a combination of I would say maybe two things or maybe more, but two things especially. The 51% rule in Sweden is a rule that states that at least 51% of the ownership and the votes in a club should be owned by the members and not by investors or people that have a financial interest in a club. This affects the possibility of clubs to invest and grow more in a company way, to compare it. And there is also another part of Swedish football, and that is that most fields, and if not the majority, are owned by municipalities, and clubs have to access these fields through a series of rules that limit how much a club can use the fields more than another club. And these things in conjunction, in my opinion, have a limiting effect on youth football and on professional football in Sweden. But like I mentioned, the commercialization and transfer of players and more money moving in football, I can see that Swedish football is moving towards more like football, I guess, is in England and Spain, Italy, where clubs that are more commercial have a setup that is more and more towards having academy teams, towards functioning like a company and such. So this is, I guess, the process that Sweden is in right now. And we have the academy teams at young ages. I think the youngest ones are 8 years old. And but this is finding itself in more and more clubs in lower and lower ages. And I guess also as a result of this process of more and more professionalization of the, to call it, industry of football, also in Sweden.
So I think I'm right in understanding this. The 51% rule is similar to Germany, right?
Yes, right.
And I guess correct me if I'm wrong, but the principle behind it is to ensure that you don't kind of have a takeover from a investor that then just does what happens in England all the time and either runs the club completely into the ground without the say of any fans or anything like that, or takes it in a direction which was worst case, which is what happened to Wimbledon back in the day in England, which is they franchised the team out and moved it, 100 odd miles north to Milton Keynes rather than keeping it where it was. So am I right in thinking that's kind of what the rule is and the principle behind it?
Yes. I would say that most people would say that that is the main reason why that rule exists. In my opinion, the rule also limits the possibilities for clubs, professional clubs, to invest in what they think is important. So this, I think, limits also their possibilities to invest in own fields, in own facilities, especially for Swedish clubs that are gaining this revenues from transfers lately. This didn't happen in the past. I mean, the sums that are being talked about right now, I think maybe 10, 15 years back didn't exist. So now they have the possibility to invest. And I know of 2 clubs here in Stockholm that are looking at that possibility, 2 professional clubs. And this, I think, will change the setup because they will be able to determine themselves which youth teams train on these facilities. It will not be limited by municipalities anymore. And I think this will change youth football as well here in Sweden. Maybe a bit different to, for example, England, where clubs own their fields and they decide everything that happens on them.
So why do you think it does challenge what they're able to spend the money on? Is it because the members can kind of go, no, you're trying to take money away from the club, or is it because they want to see it reinvested in players? Because listen, looking on social media, seems
Yes,
like everyone focuses on trying to get a new transfer in or trying to get a new player in rather than focusing on infrastructure. You
yes,
know, I'm a Tottenham fan, and Tottenham arguably have gone the other way where they've done all infrastructure and not much on the playing front. But
yes.
do you think it is the members that at times can put a blockade up and go, no, we don't want to spend the money on the infrastructure? Is that what the challenge
Well,
is?
I've seen articles where members say both. They want investments in players and they also want investments in facilities. I think that Swedish clubs, not everyone, because we have clubs like Malmo that have had quite good finances for a long time. But I think more and more Swedish clubs, through transfers, access greater amounts of money and have the possibility to take that kind of decisions. If you don't have investors, then you don't get this large amount of money. And now, thanks to transfers, they do have the money to invest in, for example, facilities. So I think it's a new situation for them because these clubs have had money before, but not those amounts of money. So now they enter a new level in this market, which I think will change the setup for clubs here in Sweden.
That's quite an interesting point as well, because thinking about it from a business perspective, if you are an investor, why would you go and chuck, you know, 2, 10, 20 million pounds at an infrastructure that actually doesn't reside with you when you leave, because it stays with the 51% or whoever then goes on? You might not get to see a return on that, because actually it's not something that's going to bring in revenue buying a new training ground. If you're being really honest, it's something that's necessary for your players to feel better and better equipped and better supported, but it's also could be a outgoing that you're not going to see any return on realistically. So that's quite an interesting dynamic in terms of what I guess investors would be willing to spend, knowing that actually you might not make the returns on the back end. Whereas now, if you are selling players and you're in a position where you can sell players and generate those funds, well, the reinvestment isn't necessarily coming out of someone's pocket. It's coming from a revenue stream that the club have received, and
Yes.
it's probably an easier sell to then, you know, then go and put it down on a training ground or facilities, etc.
Yes, and this 51% rule is challenged. You see articles on this once a year, at least. So I don't know if it's going to be a part of Swedish football in the future, even more now when Swedish football is experiencing this revenue part of the market. But right now, it is part of, I would say, a historic limitation. Maybe other people see it as something more positive than negative. And without using the word negative, this analysis of the limitations of having such a rule.
Yeah, I think that it's a really fine balance. I look at a team like Reading at the moment. So Reading was local to me when I grew up. It was probably 35 minutes from my house. And I know that next to the Medeski Stadium was the academy setup, which had a dome, and it was one of the first domes in the country. They've just built a new training ground, and all that infrastructure is there and is really, really good. And for the level they play in, the stadium is fantastic. They've got an owner now called Young, who's basically bleeding that team dry. to the extent where the fans are having to protest on the pitch during a game because this individual has a historical historical behavior where he's gone into a club, put them into administration, taken out the assets, which is the stadium, blah 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 blah, and then been able to obviously almost strip it for parts. And the fans are saying this can't happen. And so
That's the risk of having investors.
yeah.
So yes.
So I guess that's why the 51% rule's in place, because the members could turn around and say, actually, no, that isn't going to happen. But it's I guess, a really interesting balancing act, because it does provide limitations of what you're actually able to offer to players because of the bits around it, which is interesting.
Correct.
I guess from a I guess facility access point of view, but then also from a structure point of view, what do most academies look like in a training scenario? So if I was to say to you, a 12-year-old who trains at an academy in Sweden, how often would they train? What type of facilities would they train on? Is it all football based, or do they do multi-sports? And in America they do quite a lot of sports over seasons. What does that look like for an academy player coming through the system in Sweden?
Well, I have not visited every academy in Sweden, but I have, I would say, quite a good idea of the differences between the academies that are based in Stockholm and the academies that are based in other parts of Sweden. I would say one of the major differences is the access to football fields. Because in Stockholm, it's so crowded and there are so few football fields that through this limitation that I explained earlier, having the municipalities own the football fields, most clubs in Stockholm have to negotiate their way to access these fields, and this limits the space that they get access to. And they also work with having large volumes of players in this Premier Division clubs, where most players are grassroots players and limited amount of players in each age group are academy players. And this setup has also an historical explanation, because there is a rule that gives you access to football fields the year after you have participated in federative competition, in accordance to the number of players that you have had active in the club. So big clubs work with this number of players to get access to football fields, and then divide them among their teams, to give more access to academy teams and less access to grassroots teams, and try to spread them across the whole municipality. In other parts of Sweden, there is a larger access to football fields, so this is not quite a problem as it is in Stockholm. But first, just speaking about Stockholm clubs, most of them train 3 to 4 times a week, most 4, I would say. Lately, this has increased, and they get the best access to the fields, since the municipality gives to the clubs a number of hours per day on different fields, but it's the club that chooses which team trains at which hour. So they usually give the best slots to the academy teams, and these teams consist almost always of, depending on the football format, if it's 7-a-side, we play 9-a-side as well here, and 11-a-side. Everything between 10 to 16, 18 players. And they also train, have a physical training in gyms. We ourselves, I would portray ourselves as a semi-professional club. And I would say on the youth side of the club, our first team, senior team, is in amateur level. So we work in a more conscious way with the youth part of the club, and are trying to find a way to invest more resources in our senior team. But like we do in professional clubs, they have a gym on site, and usually they have, besides this 4 training sessions a week, also a session in the gym with a physical coach. So that's somewhat the setup for trainings.
So that sounds really similar to England, to be fair. Probably 3 or 4 sessions a week, game at a weekend. So majority of groups will do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. I know there's some teams that will do Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. I prefer the Sunday one and not the Saturday, just because I think writing off families' entire weekends just for football can be a bit much. But yeah, each to their own on that front. So in terms of like a starting point for academy football within Sweden, if you look at like your Malmös, etc., those big teams, what age groups are they, or do they start having academy teams? Do they travel to play one another, or do they just play locally? What does that kind of look like?
Yes. Well, I think one perspective that they portray as quite important is the competition. I guess this problem exists in England as well. When academy teams are put together, they find themselves in a problem, and the problem is that they can't find teams to compete against. Because there are very few teams that have that level of competition that the academy teams reach. And there is also a problem that in Sweden, it is not allowed to recruit players that are younger than 15 years of age. There is regulation against it. Of course, all clubs find ways to go around this regulation. Maybe parents contact other parents and such. But still, the problem that they end up with is that they can't find teams to compete against. And this is especially a problem, I would say, more in Stockholm than in Malmo, because Malmo can travel to Denmark, to Germany. There are quite short distances. So usually, academy teams in Malmo, I think they start at 9. I'm not sure, but I think they start with their academy teams at 9 years of age. I know that we have played competitions with our club at the age of 10, and the team looked quite put together that Malmo had. So this looked like a team that had been playing for at least a year together. And we, in these experiences, talking to the coaches and other people from Malmo, got to know that they get quite good competition in Denmark and in Germany. But in Stockholm, there is also another rule that sets up a problem, and that is that teams are not allowed to play 1 year up in the federative competition. So what teams do is that they play a lot of friendly games during the season, and we have now a problem in Stockholm where academy teams from the Premier Division clubs do not participate in the federative competition. So the federation has a problem with a competition that doesn't have the level anymore. And the academy teams have the problem that they can find good enough teams to compete against. So, well, this is somehow the actual situation in Stockholm and in the rest of Sweden for all these teams.
And so what's the rationale behind that? Why is that rule in place?
Do you think by the federation or by the clubs?
By the federation. The 1 year rule. Why can't they play 1 year up?
That's a very good question. At the time where this was decided, I have been active as a football coach for 18 years, and there was a time when this rule didn't exist. And I have competed with different teams 1 year up, even 2 years up. There was an opinion that stated that the players that are 1 year older didn't feel well about these games, that they could eventually lose against 1 year younger players. And I think also this is partly fault of some coaches and some teams that started playing against lower level older teams just to win games and just to have an experienced, I don't know, maybe in their perspective, positive of the game by winning the game. So this possibility to find good enough teams to play against was, I would say, partly ruined by coaches that didn't know how to access this possibility. And the federation stepped in and prohibited games against 1 year older. But since people find ways around this, like in friendly games, people are playing 1 year up, but not in federative games.
And so just so I'm correct before I ask my next question, teams like AIK, Malmo stuff, they can't officially sign a player till the age of 15. Is that correct?
Officially, yes, but
Okay.
it happens all the time.
But so they'll have younger age groups that is Malmo under 10s or whatever, but they're
Yes.
not allowed to officially sign until they're 15 years old.
Well, yes, register, I would say. In Sweden, you don't sign players. There are no contracts, so to speak. Players represent a club between the months of October and the registration, and there are some periods within the year where you can change clubs. So there is no such signing or contract situation like it exists in other countries with youth players, which are not contracts. I've spoken to people in Spain that say, well, these are not really contracts. You can leave the club. But it's even a more, I say, a free situation for players in Sweden, because you belong to a club, but just through a registration, and you can leave the club, like I said, in different periods of the year. So they have the players. What is not permitted is to contact a player to recruit a talented player to an academy directly. So there is a rule against it. So what do you call it? Poaching players from other clubs.
Okay. So if Malmo didn't want a player anymore, how would they go around that? Could they say, we're not going to register you, you need to find a new team, or not?
Yes. Well, the most common way is to have maybe a lower level team within the club. So you offer a space in another team in the club. But if the player wants to continue playing at the highest level, or to belong to a Premier Division academy team, they would probably go to another club at the same level and just change clubs and still be at that level. That is quite common. You see players that change from AIK to Hammarby to Brommapojkarna. This is quite common here. I think the clubs themselves don't like this situation, but they understand that the variables make the situation the way it is. So players and parents change teams, and this is just part of normality here in Sweden.
And do you think that then, I guess, holds clubs to account to doing what they say they're going to do? Because otherwise they know someone can just walk.
Correct. Very, very much so. Even more, I would say, also counting in clubs that are not professional, because every now and then what they call here a pop-up club starts a team, let's say for under 11s or under 10s, and they put together this top team that wins against every other team, even a lot of times against academy teams from Premier Division clubs. And this forces, I would guess, real academies, to call them that way, to have a good content in their teams, because otherwise players find other teams. Now, I think parents and also clubs themselves have become better at educating both parents, players, and themselves, at explaining that yes, you can belong to these pop-up clubs, but that's not I would not say correct, but that's not a future way of working or looking at your, if there is any, career as a youth player. You should belong to an environment that has maybe a plan for you 3 to 5 years in the future, and not be just looking for the best team for the moment. So I think that is changing as well, and for the better, I say.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So that's like the polar opposite to the UK, right? So UK, we can officially register and sign players at under 9. And then if a parent wanted to leave to go to another club at under 9, there could be, if the club enforced it, compensation due.
Whoa.
So that means that the club who the player's going to would have to pay the original club a sum of money, basically as a training fee. So you've
Yes.
worked with this player for a year. That means you have to pay this amount. The amounts have just changed over the last season, I believe. But they can get quite steep. Some of them can be, if you go category 1 team to category 1 team, they can be 9-12 grand for a year's worth of training.
Yes.
And so if an individual is with a team for under 9s, under 10s, under 11s, under 12s, under 13s, all of a sudden you could be looking at the compensation fee being a minimum of 50 grand, for example.
Wow.
And you
But
have to pay that for a 12-year-old.
okay, but are there any to call them free transfer periods for youth players where they can leave?
No.
Wow.
So a club could hold a registration. So say, for example, Malmo have their best player in the group, and he says, actually, I don't want to be here anymore because I want to go and try something new. Malmo could go, you can say, you can go, but you can't sign for another team unless we get compensation. So there's a real differentiation between the academy teams and the grassroots teams. So that
Yes.
individual could go and play in grassroots football. He could go and play in, we have something called JPL, which kind of sits in between. So you have proper grassroots football, which is, down your local park, volunteer coaches. You have JPL that sits between that, which is you pay to play, but they have full-time coaches there and give you academy-like product. And then you have academy football. That academy player could drop out of academy football into the JPL, but the minute another academy team tried to sign him, they would say, well, your compensation's due, you need to pay it.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. I see some benefits in that. I guess that academy teams take care of their players even more because they know they have some worth for them, I guess. But there are also some limitations in that. The players they don't have the possibility to make choices in the same manner that is possible here.
Yeah, no, 100%. It does have situations where players want to leave a club, but no one is capable of paying the amount or is willing to pay the amount. So all of a sudden they're in a situation where they either have to stay at the club they're at, even though it's not their preferred choice, or they have to figure out a way to get this money paid to the club to be able to allow them to move.
Yes.
But again, you have the same problem when you then move again, because you might move to a new club and then decide a year later, well, you want to move somewhere else, and then
Okay.
the same compensation rules come in. So I think that the real principle behind it was, obviously in England we have 72 league clubs. You've got Premiership, Championship, League One, League Two. they didn't want your League Two teams that have produced a really good 16-year-old to miss out on getting compensated fairly by them. Then one of the big boys then coming in and going, right, we'll have him now and put him in our first team, and there not be any compensation for that. So the premise behind it was really to try and support smaller clubs to get some money back into their academy to help them produce more players
Yes.
by if a player does leave to go to a Man United, a Man City, a Liverpool, there's some sort of monetary value in there, but it's obviously come with this different challenge which I don't think they were expecting.
Yes, very interesting. I think in that perspective that you just explained, it is a good system. It works very similarly to training compensation for professional players, but for youth players instead. Here in Stockholm, there is a club, Hammarby. It's the former sporting director. He's not there anymore. I listened to a podcast where he spoke in terms that are somewhat similar to that, signing contracts with 16 years old players in the academy. And this was to being able to control these players from not leaving to other clubs, which is the quite a common thing here in Stockholm. I guess it's to maybe protect future value, but also to have some kind of stability in the academy teams. Interesting in England, very interesting.
Yeah, my recommendation would be do 16 up, don't go any lower, because as soon as it go lower, it becomes an absolute minefield.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Like, I don't morally, you can question, should a 9-year-old have monetary value put on their training time, considering
very true.
they're a couple of years out of being in nappies.
Yes.
And he's still going to be homesick and all of that type of stuff. So I think that 16s, I would understand it, because particularly in the UK, that's the bit where they leave school, they become apprentices, and they're in full time, and like you said, probably provide some stability, and for the clubs, then they know they're making an investment, and obviously looking for something in return. But I would steer clear of going any younger, in my opinion, because I think it opens up a massive can of worms, which isn't
Yes. Yes.
isn't the best.
Yes, I agree. And it's also so difficult to predict future performance at those ages. So I agree, 9 years of age, that's too early to do that stuff.
Yeah, no, 100%. So moving on slightly, one of the things when we've been in conversations before, I'm just getting up the notes that I made here, is probably the number of visits that you've been able to do in kind of a study visit purpose. So I'm going to read like some of the names out here: Ajax, Barcelona, Espanyol, Porto, Chelsea, Sevilla, Dynamo Zagreb, Athletic Club. Like, there's loads of amazing different clubs that are on there. And also, again, the Dynamo Zagreb one, it's a really different setup that not many people would go to. From your perspective, I guess, one, what do you see the value in being able to spend, even if it's a day, in those type of environments? What in value does that have for you? And then two, is there any particular environment that stood out to you as particularly unique, or offers something that's maybe a little bit different to everyone else?
That's a very good question, because that's the exact reason why I do this visit. I think the football community, the coaches and academy directors and such, they are very well informed and share what is maybe the latest way to develop players, maybe in the traditional way, but also in new training methodologies that arise and are proven along the way. But what I try to find when I make these visits is also thinking of the culture where the club exists, and the I would say the constraints that form the reality for this club, always trying to find what's the key element of this club. What is their, I would say, their most important quality. This is what I try to find, and more as a way to inspire new perspectives on how to work with football. I guess yourself that you're working at a professional club and have seen many ways of working with youth players. This part of understanding methodology by maybe the game-based approach, or working with drills and this opposing a higher number of repetitions, or more real repetitions, and all those things that coaches discuss. Most academies know this and work with this already. So what I try to find is what is special for them. And I think, for example, one thing that really made me shiver when I was in Athletic Club, for example, in Bilbao, was this agreement that they have with many grassroots clubs and intermediate level clubs in the Basque country, where they have a scouting system that works down through this system of clubs. I don't remember the exact number, but there were hundreds of clubs that were affiliated to Athletic Club, to identify this Basque player in a certain position with a certain talent, that all clubs together work to push this player up the system towards Athletic Club, towards the Bilbao club. I guess Real Sociedad, that's also a club from that region, works in the same way. I haven't visited them. I have a contact there, so maybe this will happen in the future. But in Athletic Club, that was the thing that was so special, because I was watching a game. It rains a lot in the Basque country, and this was a Friday night. It was a game 11-a-side between 12-year-old players. It was the official Athletic Club for a 12-year-old academy team against a club that was conformed of only affiliated club players put together to play this game. And I was invited, this was at the end of my visit in Athletic Club. I was invited to see this game, and I was there with a very well-known ex-Spanish national team player, Luciano Martin, that worked in Athletic Club with Joaquin Caparrós, the former coach, and then moved to Sevilla, where I got to know him. And then he came to Athletic Club because he knows people there. And when I was watching the game, yes, of course, we have seen a lot of games between 12 years old, but he explained to me what was happening when he asked me to look around, because it was raining. It was a Friday. You have better things to do a Friday besides standing looking at 12 years olds play football. But he pointed all the people that was looking at the game, and it was the academy director, it was the director of the club, the board of directors, it was youth in charge of youth system. Everyone was there looking at that game. And he told me they are looking at the left fullback of the affiliate team because they think that player maybe is going to be an Athletic Club player next season. That was a shivering moment. I understood this is what Athletic Club, this is the key element of what they do. They have all these people, all these important people from the club looking at this game between 12-year-olds, a Friday night when it's raining, to identify one player, because they believe in this system of only playing Basque players in their first team. So that was an experience that was very special with them. When I was in Sevilla, it was their program for what they call, translated from Spanish, forcing talent, for the 3% of players that they think may reach the first team. So when they have a program where they identified this talent above other talent within academy players, and have had training sessions apart where they try to force this position-based talent with with former professional players from Sevilla that work with these players in defense or attack or whatever it was, to try to force these players to get to the second team and eventually to the first team. So this was special about Sevilla, and such with every club that I have visited. I always try to walk around, talk to people, try to find the people that have been working many years in a club to understand what is important for this club, and try to learn something from them that I can apply to my coaching or to our club, or maybe just as a nice experience of football in other countries.
Yeah, I think the position specific stuff is really interesting, particularly at the older age groups, because we all say that strikers are hard to come by, or good strikers are hard to come by.
Yes.
But how often do we actually do a lot of work with strikers putting the ball in the back of the net? I would say infrequently in most environments. Most of the time, you're probably getting situations where the play breaks down in the build up, and a good striker might get 6 or 7 chances over the entire game. So how much time do we actually specialize doing that? So the Sevilla bit is a really interesting piece of identifying who you deem as your higher potential players, and what are we providing them in addition to help them along their journey to hopefully allow them to progress. And yeah, for me, at the older age groups in particular, I think that holds real value, because it allows you to get specialization in that piece, and maybe help them towards that end goal. The Athletic Club one, I agree with you, it's a fascinating point because of the way that they have to recruit, so regionalized. It's almost like an identity for everyone in the region to latch onto. And I being really honest, having looked at it previously, I don't know how you'd replicate it. I think it would be a really hard thing to do in another country, to have that such a focal point of going, if you are a Stockholm player, this is the club that you go to because you're Stockholm and you're one of these individuals, and all of that type of stuff. So it's a really fascinating idea and principle, the fact that they recruit and that, and they look at it. But what I think it does mean is that they won't leave any stone unturned. The fact that they're working with hundreds of clubs, and there's all of them buying into this pathway of progressing players through, and there's such meaning behind it. The level of due diligence that will go into recruiting those players is going to be really high. Whereas I think that maybe in other countries, it can be easy to go, well, this player has stood out in a one game, let's bring him into the program and see how they get on, rather than doing that level of due diligence of going, actually, is this the right person for our environment?
Correct.
Do we think they're going to be successful here? What characteristics do we want to see from them? Where have they been previously? And almost having this profile of a player, so how to best support them. Because that's the bit that I think sometimes can be lost, is it doesn't matter if you recruit someone at 9 or 15 or 21, they're coming into your environment. So you need to make sure that, one, they're the right type of person to come into your environment, but two, that you're able to support them adequately. And I think that's the bit that sometimes we forget, is that we have a duty of care to support these players, and making sure they're the right types of individuals that we can support. And if you can't, be willing to almost turn around and go, you know what, in our environment, we don't think you're going to flourish as well as you could. You might flourish more somewhere else. So maybe for now, go and explore that, and we might look at this further down the line, rather than this conveyor belt of going, we've got to have everyone who's really good now. Correct. And not really thinking about how you actually have to support them.
Yes, I think these type of collaborations could be possible in other countries. I guess not the cultural part, because the Basque country has an intrinsic cultural part that is very strong. So I guess for people that are Basque, it's very important to aid the Athletic Club and Real Sociedad and all these other clubs. Alaves, I think, is also from that region. That the players maybe could play in eventually. But I think, for example, in Stockholm, it would aid to have a friendlier climate between clubs, to have some kind of collaboration where every club accepts its place in the ecosystem of football, and try to push up players to the Premier Division clubs. I would really try to work that way if it would be possible. But also, like you said, for the Premier Division clubs, not go trying to recruit every good player that they see, but really try to make an assessment. Who is this person? Is this not more than a good player, a real player for our club? Maybe in your case, a real Southampton player. Should we have him in our club? I think that would aid the football environment as a whole, both for the Premier Division clubs, but also for grassroots clubs, to see this way up for players through the ecosystem. I would aid such a system, but we don't have it here. So here is just like in England, I guess, where everyone is taking every other's players.
Yeah, I believe Germany used to have a model similar to this. It's one that I would actually support. I think that if you had each professional team is in charge of 10 localized teams, and they have to supply resources in terms of coach development and all of that type of stuff. All of a sudden, your grounding becomes way bigger. So rather than just having one team that's in charge of 12 to 16 players, you're actually focusing on 10 teams. That's 160 players per age group. If you liken that up and down the country, all of a sudden your pool becomes way wider of better informed, better supported coaches, and your grassroots pool becomes stronger because they're getting a better additional coaching and better support, and as you said, up-to-date academic research of how to support children and what standards we expect and stuff. So it's a model that I think that if people really looked into, that actually it would provide you a lot of longer term outcomes. Immediacy, I don't think it would. I think in immediacy you'd probably miss out on some players, but in the longer term, I think that actually the whole system itself would probably thrive more because it's just getting more support over a longer period, which is naturally going to produce some positive outcomes.
Yes, and a friendlier environment for within clubs.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, Karl, last question for me, and it's something I ask everyone, which is, if I was to speak to the people that you work with, how would you hope they described you in 3 words, and why?
Well, I would hope they describe me as hardworking, as putting the club first, and I hope that they portray me as a person that know enough about football to being able to work with their children.
Listen, I think that last one, from the conversation we've had there's plenty of information that you've got going around your head to be able to support an environment. So I think just from this hour-long conversation, that can be a definite tick from my end at least. But listen, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for explaining, I guess, your world in Sweden and what it looks like, and I guess comparing some of the challenges that we have on both our ends. And hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.